It has nothing to do with having two sides of the debate. Sunstein, like Kagan, is targeting the First Amendment, and he wants to censor and have mandatory government propaganda on the internet as part of that effort to do so.
And even if it was unpopular speech, that is the most protected speech under the First Amendment. But the fact that 99% in polls are against the banker bailout, he says you shouldn't be able to criticize the central banks. Behind the scenes, most of the Fed's energy is spent brainwashing police that anybody that wants to audit the Fed is a murdering terrorist. The list just goes on and on and on with all of this info. And so we know that they're aware of the fact that we're really waking up. So they're trying to move in to desperately put handcuffs on free speech, to gag free speech, but it's not going to work.
Yeah, and they're already doing it via these mandatory internet filters in places like universities, cafes, major international transport hubs, where you can't even access political websites, never mind prisonplanet.com. You can't even get to mildly political liberal websites, for example. So they're already, targeting free speech in that way.
That's right. This system of censorship has already been tested out in China. New Zealand's testing it out. Australia's testing it out. Italy's testing it out. England is trying to now start to test it out. This is now beginning to actually happen.
And it's all being directed towards licensing to use the internet. Microsoft executives have called for it. IBM executives have called for it. Even China rejected individual numbers for bloggers. They wanted to give bloggers ID cards, but it got shot down in China because it was too repressive. But this is exactly the system that is now being called for in Britain, in America, and in the West. So they want to give you a license to blog, basically, and a license to have an opinion, because they're scared that their, establishment information empire is being overturned by individuals and by political blogs, which it is.
Now, let's talk about how they plan to implement it. We probably need a part two of your story, or beef it up a bit, because it's so important. They've told us how they're going to do it, and it isn't just Alex Jones saying this. It's Newsweek, it's Mother Jones, but Newsweek says it's a good idea. It's the New York Times saying it's a good idea. The Cybersecurity Act makes all IT professionals take a government 6-month course or semester course, 5-month course, and be certified by the government. And ISPs, or internet service providers, and this is just the first round, who have more than 100 customers. Well, I don't know of any ISPs that, there's got to be very few, maybe a few small towns where the ISP has, less than 100 customers. So almost all ISPs will then have to put government software and hardware in their chain. And this, of course, is exactly what happened with the Telecommunications Act of '96, making all cell phones being GPS tracking devices, audio tracking devices. That's now admitted, tracking people in real time, even when the phone is off. By law, they're built to those specs by law. Europe was also part of similar legislation. And it's the same thing with the EAS alert system. Previously, you had one station in every town and city or region, if it was rural, where the radio stations, in an emergency alert was put out by the biggest station in town, and by emergency FCC regulations, everyone had to tune to that emergency alert if it was a real alert, not just a test. But in '96, they put in the EAS shortwave controlled, literally doomsday system, where every radio station at the studio and at the tower, it has a fail-safe. The shortwave government system dials in and takes control of radio, TV, and cable. And so this is just an expansion over all communications. So they're going to come at it that way, and they're going to come at it with the other software taxes and regulations. But if they have trouble passing it, they've already told us there's going to be big cyber attacks, which they're hyping, which, of course, they will launch, then crippling some key system. Nuclear reactors should not be hooked up to the internet, and they're not hooked up. That's a lie. But power grids shouldn't be, and they're not, but they're saying they are. So they're going to run a false flag on us. I want to underline what I'm about to say. I want to highlight it for everyone. Please listen to me very carefully. We've all got to work together on this. We've gone the last 6 years, 7 years, I guess 8 years, time just flies, since I discovered the Internet 2 plan. And they had public symposiums in London, in Tokyo, in Austin, Texas, every year. And it was the big universities, the government's meeting, the UN. And they said, in fact, they would call it each year, the Internet is dead. And if you Google that headline, you can find some of the Internet 2 articles and minutes of their meetings. These are public. I mean, anybody can, buy a ticket to it and go. And they openly laid out their plan to take over the Internet. Now, we told you how they would do it, and people said, oh, it'll never happen. Shut up, Alex. I'm not going to read your article. I'm not going to read the minutes of Internet 2 meetings. And Paul Watson and Steve Watson wrote articles about it over and over and over again. Now we're here, and they're openly announcing in the news they want to do it. They're putting people into the Supreme Court who openly are calling for it. They've got regulation czars in place. Europe is passing these laws. This is happening, okay? This is outrageous. It's unpopular. They've done national polls where over 90% of Americans are against Internet censorship. They've done national polls where upwards of 70% of Americans trust the Internet and alternative news more than mainstream news, and that number's growing. They're losing all credibility. They are going to try to do this, okay? This is really happening, and we can't live in denial anymore. So I'm begging all of the listeners to get these articles that Paul Watson has written on this subject and to send them out to everyone you know. Okay, this is really happening. I know it's incredible, all right? I mean, it's one thing to see them talking about it 8 years ago. It's another thing to see them doing it, but they're now moving to do it. Paul Watson, in closing, in the last few minutes of this hour, I think that's the number one message, is to point out this is really happening.
Yeah, it's going on. I mean, Australia's already introduced their blacklist of censored websites, which included things like anti-abortion websites, different political websites. And the problem with creating blacklists is not just that free speech is censored, it's that it completely slows the internet down as a whole. If you go to China and you try and get onto websites in China, every URL you type in has to be redirected to a central government blacklist server before you're allowed to visit the website. Now, government websites, when they get high traffic, routinely crash. So if every website that people visit first has to be routed through a government blacklist, then it's going to create infrastructure and server problems for the internet as a whole.
In fact, that's one of the main criticisms of the Australian/Chinese model by companies, is that this is going to really screw up connectability and crash the web on a routine basis.
Exactly. So that's going to affect businesses. It's going to affect everyone, not just political websites. So it's going to be bad for the economy as well as killing free speech on the internet.
And I always hear yuppies. I was talking to my neighbor the other day, and I said, the stock market's dropped by 1,000 points. And he said, well, I'm not in the stock market. And I said, well, neither am I. But it's connected to the entire economy. And I'm not mad at him. It's just that we're automatically programmed to say, I don't care, I don't have a political website. Folks, do you know why they want to shut down debate? They don't want the American people to have a voice so they can rob your pension funds, so they can have warrantless blood draws at checkpoints. By the way, a judge has struck that down. We're going to cover that later. I mean, don't people know what comes along with street cameras and checkpoints and spies and censorship? It's horrible.
Well, the ironic thing about Sunstein's white paper is that he says a large number of conspiracy theories in society indicates that we live in a repressive system, which is exactly the case. The more repressive the system gets, the more people are going to speak out. So what they define as conspiracy theories is merely an opposing viewpoint to establishment propaganda. But they want to force us all to listen to establishment propaganda.
They do. Good job. Good job.